Hello, everyone. My name is Dakota Thornton, aka Retro Coda, and welcome to episode 0 of the Scuffed as Fuck podcast. This is just a little supplemental episode to get people interested in the show and give people an idea of what to expect. Now, Scuffed AF as a whole is an idea that I've had since I was probably a sophomore in high school. I used to talk with my friends in between classes about how cool it would be to have my own podcast, to have these deep and intimate conversations with a rotating cast of guests about how gaming has affected their lives, their childhood memories involving video games, genres, and mechanics that excite them, and honestly, thousands upon thousands of other things. I daydream constantly in class about one day being able to interview even like developers, writers, voice actors, VFX artists, people who had a hand in creating some of what I would consider the greatest games of our generation, people who bring these stories to life. I was constantly keeping tabs on new announcements and releases, writing my own little articles, but I never posted them anywhere. They ended up just taking up file space somewhere in the Aether that was my school email Google Drive. And after a few months of talking about this vision I had, I finally managed to convince a few of my friends to get on board. And we had made plans to get together and workshop names for the podcast, schedule dates, go through the whole process. But unfortunately, life decided that a podcast was not in the cards at that moment in time. So I ended up shelving it and focusing on things like getting a job, because I was at this point a junior in high school or senior, getting close to being a senior, graduating from school, and then eventually moving out of my parents' place and into my own apartment. Fast forward 5 years, though, and we're, in the midst of the pandemic. I would say this is probably 2023 at this point, maybe 2022. And even though I was considered an essential worker, I was still spending a lot of my time at home. There would be days where I wouldn't even end up going into work because we just didn't have the business. Many of the podcasts that I had consumed at the time were switching to working from home, doing a lot of their stuff through like Skype calls and Discord calls and TeamSpeak and stuff like that. And there was this itch, this tug at the back of my brain. I started thinking back to this idea that I had in school, and I pitched it to a few of my online friends, and the interest was there. So I was like, okay, maybe I can do this. And I immediately got to work coming up with a name for the show. We had gone through a myriad of ideas, ranging from deep cut references to some that were more on the nose, and nothing really seemed to fit the vibes of what I really wanted. It really needed to be a name for me where the moment you looked at it, you just kind of knew what you were in for. There was one night after bouncing names back and forth between a friend of mine for a few hours, he actually had stopped and asked me, like, do you even know anything about making a podcast? Like, at all? Like, do you realize how scuffed this is going to be without having even some basic knowledge of putting something like this together? And that's kind of how the name came to be. For those of you unfamiliar with the term, scuffed is a term online that can mean like something is poorly made or awkward and embarrassing. This is not going to be on the quality level of professional podcasts for quite some time. I just want to let y'all know that right now. And that's kind of the fun in it, This is meant to feel like a chill conversation between friends. It's going to be laid back. We're going to get off topic. We're going to have, fun with it. That's what I want from this. Is I want this to be a fun experience. Now, even with all of this, I will say I ended up sitting on the name for a couple more years because I still wasn't fully sure that I would be able to pull something like this off. That is, and until recently. Earlier this week, I had reached out to a friend of mine about the idea, and he immediately latched on. I showed him the logo I had thrown together and some of the intros that I had written, And he was absolutely invested. He was like, yes, you need to do this. Within a day, he ended up actually sending me new designs that blew my original idea out of the fucking water, which I'll be posting mine that I created versus the one that he sent me for comparison on, I'll be posting them on Blue Sky. So big shout out to the Cubic Guru. He'll actually be our first guest on the show, which I am super excited for. We'll actually be diving into the world of Nintendo, which I have very, very minimal experience with. So stay tuned for that. Anyways, yeah. So the plan for the show is going to be that every 2 weeks, I'll have a guest on and we will sit and talk about video games, everything from new and upcoming releases, games from our childhood, our favorite genres, what we've been playing recently. And towards the end of each episode, I'll be picking a few comments and questions from different platforms to read out and discuss with them. And it's going to be a fun time, you know? As previously mentioned, Cubic and I will be talking about all things Nintendo for the first full-length episode. So go ahead and drop some comments and questions for us to read under this, or send your comments and questions to the podcast email account at scuffedafpod@gmail.com. That is SCUFFEDAFPOD@gmail.com. And we'll be sure to go over them. I hope you guys will stick around for more, because I cannot begin to tell you how excited I am for what's in store. Once again, I'd like to give a big shout out to my buddy, the Cubic Guru, as well as everyone who has supported me in all of my adventures thus far. And here's to many more. Thank you everyone for tuning in. And as I said earlier, be sure to follow the podcast on social media at Scuffed AF Pod on Blue Sky, YouTube, and Spotify.